Hi everybody, and welcome to the Stamperia Sunflower Art mini album tutorial series designed for Scrap and Create. This is the first video of the tutorial, so if you have not yet watched the supply video, go ahead and check that out. I will link it in the description box below because you will want to make sure that you watch that before you start so you have all of your supplies. Also, all of the supplies that are available on the Scrap and Create website will be listed in the description box below, so you can just click on those links, purchase those products, and follow along. Now in today's video, we're going to begin constructing the base of the album, and it's a little different from my previous tutorials because we're going to be using a chipboard base and we're not going to be making pocket pages. So let's go ahead and get started. We are going to begin wrapping 4 of our chipboard pieces. So the first piece is going to be for the front cover. It measures 8 1/4 by 8 1/4. We need 1 piece of cardstock that measures 8 1/2 by 9 1/4. Now I'm just going to take my ruler and mark on here at the bottom at 1/2 inch, and I'm going to draw a horizontal line so that I have this as kind of like a placement guide for my piece. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to adhere this so that my chipboard edge is actually right at the edge of my cardstock. There's going to be 1/4 inch here on this side and 1/2 inch at the top and the bottom. If you are using 12 by 12 cardstock and you want to wrap completely, you can cut this 9 1/4 by 9 1/4 and completely wrap if you want to, but we're not going to see this edge anyway, so it's okay if you're doing what I'm doing and using the 8 1/2 by 11 sheets of paper. So I'm just going to use my tacky glue here. I'm going to apply my adhesive all along the entire back of this chipboard piece, making sure that I have a pretty good amount of coverage so that it will stick, but you don't want so much glue that it is dripping either. So it's one of the things you kind of start to learn the more you build mini albums and do other projects, is how much glue is enough versus how much is too much. I'm going to use my 1/2 inch line that I drew as a guide to place this so that it is straight. And then I'm actually going to turn this over to make sure that it's straight on this line here before I burnish this down. Using my bone folder here just to give this a really good, nice adherence, because we want this to lay flat onto our cardstock. Once we have that done, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to very carefully miter my corner there, making sure that I leave enough past my corner so that it will be wrapped whenever I do go and do this next step. So I'm going to fold my ends over on both sides. And then I'm going to use my bone folder on top of this paper to get a nice good crease. Now when you do this, if any of your paper here is hanging over, you want to slightly cut that, miter that corner so that it is not hanging over, because it will create some unwanted bulk in your seams when we go to put the side pieces on after all of these covers are wrapped. So I've got my adhesive on my tab. I'm just going to fold this over to wrap that edge. Going to do the same thing on this side, adding my adhesive here on this tab section, and then I will fold this section over to wrap this edge of my cover. Once I have both of those pieces up, I'm going to take my bone folder and push my cardstock around that corner. You can go down your piece and then just press in. That will also wrap that. It's an easy way to do it. Once those are wrapped, you're going to carefully fold this. I'm going to burnish from this side first and then come back here since it is so small. I usually like to have at least a 1/2 inch, but because of the size, I don't. And I would normally use a 12 by 12 paper here, but for some reason, the 12 by 12 Kraft is not actually the same color as my 8.5 by 11 Kraft cardstock, so I don't want to mix and match those. It's a lot easier though, so if you're able to do that, you can. But we can make do and just make sure that we're going to get this wrapped and adhered, and then we will get it to stay where it needs to go. So it takes a little bit for that glue to grip. So just take your time and keep pressing down using your bone folder. And once you've got a good adherence, then run your bone folder over the edge, pressing it up against the edge so that it is nice and tight, and then flattening again over the top. And once our album is done, you will never know that that only has a 1/4 inch because there's going to be layers of paper and cardstock over top of this. So now we have this. This is going to be our front cover. It's actually going to be upside down just with the text right now. This will be the front cover. We'll have a spine piece here. We'll put that on in just a few minutes. And we're going to work on the next piece, which is going to be the right side. So I should say this is the left side. It'll flip to the left. The next one will be the piece that's going to flip to the right. And we're going to do the same thing as we did with this piece. So for the right piece, the chipboard measures 8 inches by 8 1/4. We have a piece of cardstock that measures 8.5 by 9 1/4. And this one, we're going to be able to do this 1/2 inch on all 3 sides. So we're not going to cover one of the sides. It's going to end up, again, it's just going to be upside down when I do this, but that's okay. I'm going to mark this first at a 1/2 inch and give myself a guideline. Then I'm going to flip my piece over and add my adhesive on the back side. Once my piece has the adhesive on the back, I'm going to use my guide on the bottom and line this up with the edge on the right hand side. And then I'm going to press this down. Next, I'm going to take my scissors and miter my corners, again, making sure to leave some of the cardstock so that it will wrap that corner. So I'm just going to start folding over. I'm going to fold all 3 of these ones just to get them started. Then I'm going to go with the top and bottom first, burnishing this really well. When you do this, this is what makes your album have really nice, good creases. It looks very clean, it's very crisp. So make sure that you use your bone folder to do this step. Then we'll open back up, add adhesive, and adhere both of these pieces down. Once both of those edges are adhered down, take the bone folder and make sure to press that paper down along those corners. And then fold this edge up, use your bone folder, make sure it's nice and crisp. And then adhere that so that we have our 3 sides of this piece of chipboard wrapped too. So now this piece is finished. It's going to go like this. This is going to be the flip for the right side. Next, we're going to work on the piece for the top. It measures 8 1/4 by 8 inches. So I have a piece that measures 9 1/4 by 8 1/2. I need this one to be on one of the sides because we're going on the bottom edge here. So I'm going to mark this with my guide, and then I'm going to adhere this down at the bottom edge. So I'm going to place my adhesive on the whole back side of this piece, and then I will apply it to my cardstock. Once I have my piece, I'm going to use that guide on the side and line my paper up with my bottom edge and adhere this down. Once that's adhered, I'm going to take my scissors, miter both of my corners, and then I'm going to fold my edges over. And then just like the previous pieces, I'm going to start with these, fold these over, tuck my corners, and then fold my 3rd side in. This is my top cover finished, so I'm going to go ahead and set this one aside and bring in my final one. It's the bottom, and it's actually very similar to the top. It is 8 1/4 by 8 inches. The cardstock is 9 1/4 by 8 1/2. I'm going to add my guide on one side at a 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to adhere this one here so that the top edge is lined up with the edge of my cardstock. Now that that is adhered, I'm going to take my scissors, miter my corners, flip my edges over, and then just like the previous pieces, I'm going to start with my side pieces and adhere those down first, and then I would adhere the 3rd side down to wrap those edges. And now we have the bottom piece finished as well. All 4 of the pieces are ready, but we need one more piece for the base. And the base is an 8 1/4 by 8 1/4 piece. We're not going to cover this piece yet though, because we're going to have strips around it that are attaching these pieces to this piece. And then we'll put a piece on the back of it to cover it. And there will be a piece of decorative paper here. So this one does not need to be wrapped, but these are the 5 pieces that we will need to begin building the base. And next, we're going to begin building our spine pieces using more pieces of chipboard from the remainder of the piece and more strips of cardstock. The first chipboard spine piece measures a 1/2 inch by 8 1/4 inches. And we're going to need a piece of cardstock that's 1 3/4 by 9 1/4. We're going to take this and adhere it right into the center of the piece. Now you can go ahead and mark this if you really want to, like we did the last ones, but because these pieces are so small, I'm just going to go ahead and eye mine and place it where it looks like it is centered. So once I have my adhesive on, I will place it right in the center of my piece. Now I'm going to take this and wrap my end up just like we did with the last one. with the cover pieces or the chipboard pieces, except for now we're going to take this on either side. We're going to use our bone folder, pressing up against this, and then pressing this piece down. So it's going to wrap our chipboard. Then we'll move over here and do the same thing to this side, getting a nice crisp edge first, and then using the bone folder to wrap the edges of the chipboard. Then I'm going to take my adhesive and I'm going to apply my adhesive to this whole entire section here. And then I'm just going to redo what I did so that it will be adhered down. And then I'll do the same thing on this side here to wrap the other end. Once you have your piece wrapped, you'll want to take a ruler and we're going to measure 1/8 of an inch on both sides of the piece. My chipboard, when I double it up, is 1/8 of an inch. So that's where I've got my 1/8 inch measurement from. If you're using different chipboard, you want to measure yours to make sure that it's 1/8 of an inch. If it's more than that, you need to leave more room. If it's less, you can still just leave 1/8 of an inch and it will work. So now I'm going to draw a line at 1/8 of an inch on both sides. This is going to act as a guide for where my other piece of chipboard is going to go on either side, because I need to leave 1/8 of an inch so that when we fold this, it doesn't hit on the other piece of chipboard and crack. So we've got our first piece. We're going to leave it like that. We're going to do the same thing with 3 more pieces. The next one is 1 inch by 8 1/4. And then the paper or the cardstock is 2 1/4 by 9 1/4. So we will take the chipboard piece first, add adhesive to the back side, and then we're going to place it right down in the center of this piece. Once it's on the paper, we're going to do the same exact thing as we did with the last one. And we're going to wrap the short ends first. I'm just going to form my cardstock and then add my adhesive so it's nice and flat. Once I have my piece wrapped, again, I am going to mark this 1/8 of an inch from each side, and then draw my lines so that I know where to place my other chipboard piece. Once I have these marked, I'll go ahead and set that piece aside. For the third piece, we have the chipboard is 1 1/2 by 8 1/4. The cardstock is 2 3/4 by 9 1/4. And I'm going to do the same thing, adhering this down here to the center, flipping the short ends over, adhering the short ends, and then I'm going to mark this at 1/8 of an inch on each side. Once the third piece is marked, go ahead and set it aside and we'll cut the final piece. This one is 2 inches by 8 1/4, the chipboard piece, and then the cardstock is 3 1/4 by 9 1/4. We're going to do the same thing where we add this to the center, flip up the short edges, adhere them down, and then mark this at 1/8 of an inch on each of the long edges. Okay, so now we have all 4 of our spine pieces done. We're going to go ahead and start adding all of our pieces on and putting these together so that we form one album. We are going to take the largest of the spine pieces. This is the 2-inch piece by 8 1/4. And we're going to take our front cover that is wrapped on the left-hand side and the right-hand side is open. We're going to add adhesive only on this 1/2 inch section, not going over that line that we drew, and we're going to place this down here like this, and we're going to make sure that our cover does not go over that line. So I'm just going to first add my adhesive to my piece. Make sure you don't go over that line here. Then I'm going to use my ruler. I'm going to place this piece up against my ruler, and I'm going to place this piece up against that line, but also up against my ruler because I want to make sure that this is straight. So I've got a couple of things that I'm lining up here. So go ahead and take your time when you're doing this. Once you get everything where you want it, go ahead and press down and burnish. Now I'm going to flip this over, and I'm also going to burnish this from the back side. So we have our first piece on. We've got our front cover and our left spine. I'm going to take my next largest spine piece. This is 1 1/2 by 8 1/4. And I'm going to take my piece for my right-hand side. So the right-hand edge is covered, the left-hand edge is exposed. And I'm going to do the same thing that we did with the other side, except for I'm going to apply my adhesive on the right side this time. So I've got my adhesive. First, I need to put on my piece, making sure that I keep it in that 1/2 inch section only. And then again, using my ruler as an edge guide and taking my piece, I'm going to set it down to the right of my line. Then I'm going to use my ruler across the bottom to line everything up. And then I'll press everything down. And I'm going to flip this over to the back side and burnish it down. And now I have my right hand side. I'm gonna set this aside. I've got my 1 inch by 8 1/4 inch spine piece, and I've got my top piece where the bottom edge is exposed and the top part is covered. And for this one, this piece is going to go here. I'm going to just turn it sideways so that it is a little easier for me to work with. So I'm going to add my adhesive to my 1/2 inch wing piece on my spine. And then again, using my ruler, I'm going to line this up. Make sure that I'm not going over that line. Everything is lined up. Then I'll burnish this down. I'll flip over and burnish from the back side too. So now I have my top piece. We should have our small 1/2 inch spine section and our bottom piece that is not finished on the top edge. I'm going to take my spine section and add my adhesive first. Then I'm going to use my ruler, line this up. Make sure everything is good. It shifted, so I'm gonna make sure that it's in the right spot, and then I would adhere this down. Flip over and adhere on the back side. And now we have our bottom piece. Next, we're going to start adding pieces to our back panel. So the back panel is 8 1/4 by 8 1/4. And we're going to start first. I have my bottom panel, so I'm going to apply my adhesive here to this 1/2 inch on the end, past the spine. And we're going to do pretty similar to what we just did. We'll put the piece down. I'm gonna turn this sideways while I can. I'm going to take my back panel and I'm going to add it here, just past that guideline, making sure that the edges are lined up, and then I'm going to burnish this down. Now, one thing that you can do if you want on these pieces, you can miter these corners because there is going to be an overlap, so it's going to be a little bit bulkier here in the corners. I'm just going to leave mine as is. So there is the bottom panel. I'm going to find the right panel next, or the top panel next. And I'm going to add my adhesive. Using my ruler as a guide, I'm going to take the back piece and adhere it right next to my guideline. Once I have it in place, I'll burnish it down. I'm gonna flip this over and burnish from the back side. It's gonna be a little harder to fit on my desk. I'm gonna try to keep this in frame. I've got my next panel here. This is the panel that goes on the right side. So I'm going to add my adhesive to this 1/2 inch tab section first. And now I'm going to take this and I'm going to line up the edge of my chipboard with that 1/8 inch guide. And I'm going to line up this so that it's in the center of my pieces. It's a little harder to do because you can't really put your ruler in here. So you have to just eye it to make sure that it's in the right spot, being very careful. Going to burnish this down. And then I'll flip over to the back side and burnish again. And this is where I said it will have these lumps, so it'll be a little bit bulkier there because there's so many layers, so you can miter those and then it'll lay a little bit easier. So now the only one left is my front or my left side. I will add my adhesive here first to this 1/2 inch section. And then just like we did on the last piece, we're going to place this one down. Make sure that it's on that 1/8 inch guideline. And then centered here and here. And then adhere that down. And then I'll burnish from the back side. Next, I'm going to be covering each of these pieces with paper. So I've got my first piece that measures 3 1/4, and this is just slightly under 8 1/4 inches. So that way it will actually just fit on here, but it won't stick over. But this piece is actually going to go here, centered over the spine, so that it is covering those gaps, and it's going to cover the chipboard on the base of the page. To do this step, I'm going to take my adhesive and apply this all over the entire back side of this piece. So I have my adhesive on, I will flip over. I'm just going to eye this. If you want to measure it, you can, but I'm just going to eye mine and make sure that it is covering the edge of my chipboard and those little gaps. I'm gonna take my bone folder and run it in that crease. Then I'm going to adhere it to my cover. Same thing here, I'm going to take my bone folder and run it in that crease, and then I will adhere it to the cover. For the next piece, it's 2 3/4 by slightly less than 8 1/4. This one's going to go here, same way we covered this one. Make sure that you adhere this into the crevice and then press it into the covers. So we have the next one is 2 1/4 by just slightly under 8 1/4. We're going to place this piece right here. For the last piece, it measures 1 3/4 by slightly less than 8 1/4. This one's going to go here and cover the final spine. Okay, so now all of our spines are covered. I'm going to go ahead and just let this dry really well. Then I'm going to come back and start bending all of these into the actual style of the album so that they're all condensed on top of each other. Now that my album has had a chance to dry, I'm going to start, this is my bottom cover. I'm going to start first with taking my bone folder in this first fold, and I'm going to just bend this up. Then I'm going to take the next one and bend it up and over. And I'm going to push it slightly over so that it's more than a 90-degree angle, and then come back. And now I have my first panel. I'm going to fold this back down for now, and I'm going to come to my top panel, and I'm going to do the same thing. So don't do what I did. I just tore a hole in mine, so don't push too hard. I will fix that later with some glue so that it doesn't actually cause an issue. So don't ever press too hard into your paper. Be careful what you are doing. Bend up. Do the same thing here in this fold. And then I'm going to bring this one up, again, slightly past 90. That way it'll actually go all the way in to where I want it to be. And then I'm going to bend this out a little bit. So now when I have my first one, I'm gonna work these a little bit so that they fold a little easier. I'll have my first, this is the bottom, my second panel, this is the top. Now I'm going to bring this in here. I'm going to open both of these, and I am going to lightly burnish that and then fold up on this one. Same thing here. I'm going to lightly burnish again, and then I'm going to fold up on this one past 90 degrees, and then bring this one down, open back up. Same thing on this side. I'm going to burnish both of my folds, lifting up on this one, and then burnish my inner fold, folding up on this one past 90, and then coming back out with it. Just working it again so it's a little bit easier to move when you are opening and closing. So now we've got the bottom flap, the top flap, the right flap, and the left flap. So this is what the album is going to look like. There are gaps in here because we're going to build up each of these pages, and we want there to be enough room for everything. So between the cover and this, there's going to be stuff built up here and here. Then when this opens, there will be stuff here and here. And then there will be stuff here and here. And then finally here and down here. Once we have those folds, we can go ahead and flip over to the back side. I have a piece of cardstock that is just slightly less than 8 1/4 by slightly less than 8 1/4, and I am going to place it here, covering up the entire back side. You don't actually have to do this if you don't want to, because there will be decorative paper there, but I am going to do that just because I like the look of it completely covered. Once that's covered, I'm going to go ahead and turn my album back over and just fold it all in. And we are ready to move on. This is all for this part of the tutorial. So we have our base of our album built. In the next tutorial, we're going to start building up the different pages of the album. So stay tuned for that. And don't forget, if you want to make this album and you haven't purchased your supplies yet, check out the description box below for all the links to the products on the Scrap and Create website. See you next time.